Welcome to Coursen's Corner, a protective strategy podcast to help you succeed in staying safe. My name is Spencer Coursen. I am a threat management expert and founder of Coursen Security Group. And in this week's episode, we are talking about election night 2020. More specifically, protective strategies you and your loved ones can and probably should employ to ensure the certainty of safety over the course of the next few days, and maybe even longer. Now, some of you may be thinking, look, man, you're overreacting. This is fear-mongering. You're being too dramatic. We're all going to be just fine. We've been here before. There wasn't a big deal. And you know what? You might be right. In fact, I hope you are. But just hear me out. I would rather you be armed with the best information possible and not need it than to need it and not have it. I really do hope that election night goes without any incident, that even if there isn't an outcome on Tuesday night, that there is enough legitimacy in place for us to be comfortable and to have faith and strength and resolve in the process. But a reliance on hope is not a safety strategy, and it is certainly not something that I would ever recommend. Like I have always said, you have to have a plan in place. Awareness plus preparation equals safety. And no matter how much you may pray for peace, no matter how much you may shun both riots or violence, it is always better to have the mindset of the warrior who is tending to the garden than it is to be the gardener who finds themselves besides themselves when thrown into the battlefields of war. Now, America has always prided itself on our ability to facilitate a peaceful transition of power. And this is something that other countries, this is something that we take for granted. Around the world, other countries and nation states, other developing nations, they are not afforded such luxury. I can remember one particular visit I was in Equatorial Guinea, and we were being housed at the presidential palace. And as you came into the lobby, all of these presidential portraits are lining the wall. And as you look at them, you couldn't help but notice how short a timeline each one of them had served. Each one of them only served a fraction of the time they had intended to serve in office. Their duties, and in many cases their lives, were cut short by assassination or military coup or some other kind of violent opposition. But in America, our rule of law has always served as the legitimacy by which we allow ourselves to be governed, which ensures the peaceful transition of power, which of course has proven to work for us for however long our country's been in existence. It works very well. But again, it only works very well because we have thus far allowed for it to do so. Now, do things always play out the way we want? No, of course not. In every contest, there are winners and there are losers. But regardless of outcome, we, as Americans, we have all agreed to abide by the rules of the game. Look what happened in 2016 with Trump versus Clinton. Now, I was in New York City the morning after the 2016 election. People were confused. People were upset. They didn't understand how that outcome could have occurred. But their display of emotion and their resolve and their investment in what would later become known as this resistance movement, it was 100% peaceful. Subway stations were filled with colorful Post-it notes encouraging others to stay strong. Marches were planned, support groups were formed, and voices which spoke out in opposition were given a platform via podcast or TV show or news outlet or website to air their concern and grievance. But I am terrified that this time around, that second verse will not be the same as the first. We are much more polarized now than we were then. We are much more tribal. We are much more willing to live in an existence without nuance, without understanding that you can disagree with someone without making that someone your enemy. So how are things different? Well, for one, the Donald Trump victory in 2016 came as such a shock to most people, especially those living in, major urban areas where the agenda of more left-leaning think and groupthink and of a media narrative, which promoted there's this philosophy that there was no doubt that a Clinton victory would be happening. That narrative went so largely unchallenged that most were caught off guard by the outcome. And they weren't wrong. Clinton did win the popular vote by a rather healthy margin. But our elections aren't decided by a popular vote. They are decided by an electoral vote. And the reality that Trump won more electoral votes than Clinton did, that Trump won more electoral votes, Clinton won more popular votes, but electoral votes is how the game gets played. And so many people knew that but didn't digest that, and that only added to the heartbreak and the shock and the disbelief of her supporters. And in fairness, nothing like that had really ever happened before. The polls had never been so wrong. The news cycle had never really gotten it that wrong. And most people, especially Clinton supporters, just didn't understand how they could have been so misinformed. And because they were so misinformed, because they had such a certainty in outcome, there was zero expectation in the hearts and minds of her supporters that her losing could ever be a reality. And so there was no plan in place for them to contest their displeasure, for them to contest the outcome. But this time will be different. This time, opposition on both sides are expecting an upset because both sides have lost faith in the rule of law and the system of government. And they have what perhaps is the most critical component of violent opposition. They have time to plan. They have had time to plan. They have been planning for what they're going to do if things don't go their way all along. And I want to come back to that point in just a moment. But first, let's start this conversation by framing the expectation about the reality of what is most likely to happen tomorrow night, Tuesday night, election night. First things first. We must accept that we have never had an election like this. This will be the first time in our nation's history where we will be processing the results of an election during a pandemic. Now, yeah, things may go very smooth. There may be nothing to worry about. It is very much within the realm of possibility that the ballots may be counted and totaled much quicker than we believed possible, that a victor will be decided, that a concession call will be made, and a victory speech will be given. And we will all go to bed Tuesday night knowing that the incumbent will continue to serve for another 4 years, or that Joe Biden will win and that a peaceful transition of power will take place in January. And while that outcome is in fact possible, we should all be very honest that it's not very probable. Which means that the betting odds are highly in favor of Tuesday night going just about as smooth as the Grand Canyon. Which of course is to say it's going to get rocky. If 2020 has taught us anything, it's that Murphy's Law is alive and well and quite possibly doing better than ever. And in a world where anything that can go wrong most certainly will, smart money is on this election being a complete and total shit show. which means we should all frame our expectations that we will not know the outcome of the election on election night. Even though there are some states like Florida, for example, who have been employing an early voting and mail-in process for years and who have, at least given every expectation, at least to, news reports, that they will have all of the votes counted up soon after the polls close on Tuesday night. That is simply not the case for the rest of the states in our country, many of which are, even today, still trying to put together the infrastructure to get tomorrow night's votes all, counted up and tallied and verified as soon as humanly possible. I mean, it is very much within the realm of reality that we could be deep into late November or even early December before we have a projection, and that does not even take into account the very high likelihood of this mess getting kicked up to the Supreme Court, anyway. And if you think that whole mess getting kicked up to the courts will be smooth sailing, just remember how things went in 2000 when Bush v. Gore took the voting results in Florida and all of its, hanging Chad glory, to the Supreme Court. And then imagine that same thing happening again, only this time it won't just be one state, it could be as many as 50. And so, what does all of this mean for you and me? It means that it's going to get real. I have said from day one that the biggest concern of the COVID-19 pandemic was not that it was a health medical problem. But rather that it posed a significant national security problem. So much of our sense of safety is grounded in our perception of certainty. And when things are uncertain, the center of gravity begins to shift. The core constructs that hold the foundation in place begin to crumble as fringe beliefs and constructs begin to grow and take hold. Like a weed coming up through a small crack in the pavement. And the longer that weed goes left unchecked, the deeper its roots are allowed to grow, the more control it takes over, pre-existing real estate, the harder it will be to clean up once the mess is cleaned up, once order is restored, once the return to normalcy has begun. And for a great many of our nation's enemies, both foreign and domestic, they have been waiting for us to take our eyes off the prize, to be distracted, just long enough for their concepts to seem less than, outside the norms of what we would otherwise choose to adopt. And instead, allow their agents of chaos, their agents of change to enter into our system under the camouflage of solution. Because when there is a lack of leadership, it is in our human nature to gravitate towards strength. And an election night where no victor is decided, where there is no clear vision for what comes next or who will lead or what the future is most likely to hold, that is the very definition of uncertainty. And that uncertainty will be the invitation to the vast spectrum of actors who want nothing more than to create chaos, disruption, fear, and instability into our democracy. Foreign interference, civil unrest, protests, rioting, looting, and anyone else who looks like a bad guy in a Batman movie who just wants to watch the world burn will use this as an excuse to do their worst. And in the event that any of that should happen, we all must be prepared to not just confront those who would want to do us harm, but to have a plan in place to secure our return to normalcy as best we are able. So how do we do this? We do this by employing the most practical things we can, which will have the most realistic impact on our environment. So here are 5 things that I encourage everyone to consider for election night. Number 1, stay informed with legitimate sources of information. It is very important that regardless of what happens, that we, all of us, understand how to discern if a story is being sold to us or if a story is being told to us. It all comes down to nuance. Some narratives, especially on social media, may be taking things out of context or are otherwise trying to incite behavior or validate behavior or justify behavior that really only helps to support their preferred outcome. What's best for them, not what's best for us. And especially on election night, focus more on what is happening locally. What is happening outside your front door is much more important to you than what is impacting a neighborhood on the other side of the nation. It is perfectly fine to have empathy or sympathy for what is impacting another, but it is of critical importance that you are cognizant and mindful and aware of what is going on outside of your own front door for you to stay safe. Number 2, be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. It sounds simple, but it's such an important component. Between helping to make things better or acting as an accelerant, please choose the former. In more simple terms, throw water on a fire, not fuel. When chaos starts to emerge, do your very best to bring calm to that chaos, to bring reason to the uncertainty, to do your best to keep everyone informed with the best information, to refute false information, and to help everyone process and move forward the best they possibly can. Which is not to say that some safeguards should not be employed, because they absolutely should. So number 3, bolster enhancements to your own home security plan. Listen, while most situations relating, especially over the past few months, this summer, have all of the protests and the riots which occurred in the name of social justice, they all historically took place in urban areas. But on election night, there is a very high degree, there is I wouldn't say a very high degree, there is a moderate degree of likelihood that small pockets of social unrest could occur in more suburban neighborhoods. So I want you to take this opportunity to not make yourself an identifiable target of opportunity. So think about removing, the election signs or the bumper stickers or the public-facing support for who you preferred as a presidential candidate. There's, that whole threshold theory where the first person that comes outside and is screaming and mad and wants to do something, and then one of their neighbor comes out, and then you have 3, and then you have 4, and then 5. Like, you just don't know what's gonna come on. So just take the necessary precautions. Double check your security cameras are operational and functional. Be sure you have enough food and water and necessary supplies on hand, so that if it is in fact safer to stay home, that you are not without the necessary essentials that you need to stay healthy. Number 4, use technology to your advantage. I mean, especially during COVID, we have all gotten really good at FaceTime and Zoom and group chats and what have you. So use this technology to your advantage. But instead of promoting fear, use it to support your friends and your family. Check in on one another, talk to one another, see who needs help, offer assistance. Our ability to stay connected at all times is both a blessing and a curse. But when moments matter most, having a support system at the ready, whether that's FaceTime or Zoom or group chat or direct messenger, can be a great way to not feel so alone during a potentially isolating time. It can be a great way to share, depending on which side of the political aisle you happen to be on, your support or your upsetness or your resolve or your whatever it is. Talk it out. Be with your friends, be with your family. Do what you can to, self-care first, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. And number 5, stay off the streets. Listen, while it is absolutely your right to assemble and protest and petition, there's a very fine line between exercising your rights and staying safe. And when, tend to the part of the garden that you can touch. That's not my quote. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing another quote that I read. But tend to the part of the garden you can touch. Don't get so anxious and overwhelmed over the things that you cannot control. But again, don't be so reticent about not partaking in the practices and the programs where you can do some good. I think it's important that all of us really just take a deep breath, see how things are going. Our country has been here and has been doing well for 200 years, and I have every reason to believe that it will be in existence for 2,000 more. We're going through some growing pains. We're going through some hardships. We are, finally recognizing that there has been a lot of injustice in the world, and that we need to do better at making the world not just a better place for everyone, but that opportunity exists across the board. But that does not mean we need to burn the world down to make that happen. We're going to be all right. We're going to be good. We just need to get through, what is most certainly going to be a very tumultuous weeks and months. But I have every certainty that we're going to come out on the other side stronger, smarter, and more secure than we ever were before. Just remember that everyday safety requires the participation of everyone, and we will get through this just fine. All right, everybody, I'm going to wrap things up here. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you. I love you. Stay safe. Be well. Work, sweat, win. And I will see you back here next week. Thank you.